Johnson's War. What factors, events, and individuals were responsible for the escalation of US involvement in Vietnam? Secondly, was it Johnson's War? Read through the information on this PowerPoint on Johnson and his involvement in the Vietnam War after the 1964 presidential election. As you are going through the PowerPoint, use the information to complete the sentences and questions on your task sheet. Why was Johnson able to escalate the war? Johnson was urged to escalate the war by his advisors, particularly McNamara and Rusk. These are the men, as you will remember, will also be advisors to Kennedy beforehand. Johnson believed that if he was to escalate the war, he needed public and congressional support. He got his support through the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. North Vietnamese attacked US patrol boats, and Congress passed this resolution, which gave Johnson the power to take all necessary measures to prevent further aggression and achieve peace and security. It effectively meant that he could take the US into a full-scale war. Winning the 1964 presidential election gained votes by appearing tough over the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Remember, this domestic audience has been a factor all the way through the course. Why did Johnson escalate? Before the 1964 election, he promised not to take the US into a war. There's continuity here with the policies of Kennedy, and also the fact that as the newly ascended president, he didn't have a popular mandate from the American public. Some believe that Johnson's combative personality made escalation inevitable. Such an aggressive man would seek a military solution to the problems. He was perceived as very arrogant. "I've been kissing asses all my life and I don't have to kiss them anymore," he's quoted as saying. Privately and frequently, he admitted that he did not know what to do about Vietnam. More often than not, he responded to advice and the pressure of events. The incompetence of the Saigon government. One major cause of escalation was that the Saigon regime was obviously not responding to the advice or winning the war. New Ambassador General Maxwell Taylor suggested America should be prepared to run South Vietnam. Taylor was not a good choice. He used a military solution and not a diplomatic one, being a military man himself. In November 1964, the Viet Cong attacked the US base near Saigon. These VC attacks, which Saigon regime seemed powerless to halt, nudged the Johnson administration towards escalation. Working Group recommendations. Working Group was formed on Johnson's orders. Defense Department, State Department, CIA, and the Joint Chiefs. They were hired to study Vietnam and suggested policy options. The Working Group said an independent and anti-communist South Vietnam was vital to American interests. They reiterated the domino theory and said that American national prestige, credibility and honour were at stake. We recall from previous lectures that's powerful language to a man like Johnson. They emphasised that escalation was necessary due to the weak Saigon government, which was close to a standstill and plagued by confusion and poor morale. Thus, although Johnson is blamed for escalation, his advisers were behind him. His military and civilian experts were urging escalation in the interest of national security. Congress and the public seemed to be supporting them in this. On 7th of February 1965, the US launched Operation Rolling Thunder. Rolling Thunder involved expensive bombing raids on military and industrial targets in North Vietnam. It was the beginning of an air offensive that was to last until 1972. Defending American bomber bases with Rolling Thunder. Why did Johnson take this escalatory step? The immediate trigger was concern over the security of US bomber bases and their personnel. A number of incidents caused great pressure from his advisers to retaliate. Johnson ordered massively increased air attacks on North Vietnam. America now moved beyond occasional air raid reprisals to a limited air war against a carefully selected targets in North Vietnam. This was called Operation Rolling Thunder. This was meant to bomb supply routes, decrease infiltration from the north, the border between North and South was porous and leaked, demoralize the Hanoi government in North Vietnam, and revitalize the Saigon administration. Johnson, however, refused to declare war on Vietnam. Defending American bomber bases with American troops. Since spring 1965, Johnson made his second great escalatory step when he sent large numbers of American ground troops into Vietnam. It was requested that US Marines be brought in to protect a vital US base at Da Nang. Ambassador Taylor warned Johnson that once American forces were committed, more would have to be sent to protect them. Reason not to send US troops. He rightly forecast that white Americans would fight no better than the French in the jungle. Americans would be unable to distinguish between the VC and friendly Vietnamese farmers. It would alienate Congress and world opinion. It would keep Beijing and Moscow on edge. But Johnson ignored these warnings. The 8th of March 1965, 3,500 Marines landed. 6th of April 65, this was increased with a further 18,000 support troops to keep the soldiers supplied. Many accused Johnson of waging a war without a declaration of war. Johnson was not alone. Congress granted $700 million, and the House of Representatives voted 408 to 7, and the Senate 88 to 3 in favor of these moves. And at the time, the majority of the American journalists were also fully supportive of these actions. When Vietnam is called Johnson's War, the support given by Congress and the press should be remembered. What was the immediate impact of escalation? Johnson hoped the arrival of US troops would improve the position of Saigon, but it continued to deteriorate. General Thieu, the head of state, was indecisive, cunning, stubborn, and corrupt. Prime Minister Cao Ki was a womanizer. Kai's government was losing control of territory to the VC, who, according to Thieu, had 75% of the countryside already under their control. As Taylor had feared, the more American troops poured in, the less the South Vietnamese wanted to fight. By the end of 1965, more men were sent. 200,000 American combat troops were in Vietnam, and polls still suggested that 70% of the nation was supportive of Johnson. However, some people were beginning to question these policies. Was it Johnson's war then? Yes. As president, he made the decision to continue Kennedy's commitment and then to escalate. He ordered each escalatory step himself, rolling thunder and then more combat troops. Johnson's combative personality made escalation inevitable. Such an aggressive man would seek military solutions, and also that was the advice and the nature of the individuals that were giving him the advice. Withdrawal would have made him immensely politically unpopular. Remember the American domestic position. As George Bull has pointed out, Johnson could have overruled his advisers and listened to those who urged alternative courses of actions and get out. The argument for it not being his war. Many of his advisers share a degree of culpability, such as Rusk and McNamara. He inherited a strong commitment to South Vietnam from Kennedy, and therefore it would have been very difficult for him to disengage, initially when he was the new president, but also arguably after he had become president in '64. He felt bound to continue Kennedy's policies to keep Kennedy's advisers. Johnson, we have already discussed, was a man of honor. Congress must bear responsibility. They granted not only political support but huge financial subsidies in '65. The American public must bear responsibility. 70% were behind him. And the press, certainly earlier on, were very much on his side. Johnson ignored questioning from people like George Bundy and Taylor about the wiseness of committing US troops. Johnson just didn't listen to the other side of the argument. It wasn't that he wasn't informed. Johnson consistently deceived the American people about his decisions in Vietnam. It wasn't Johnson's war because the House of Representatives voted massively in favor of the action to deploy troops. Kevin Ruan argues that Johnson agonized over Vietnam even after his election in '64, and even though the Joint Chiefs were urging him to take more serious action. Wider reading.